Unbroken Arrows podcast. As always, I'm Catherine.
And I'm Greg. Today's episode, we have a guest that is a friend of Catherine's family. His name is Pat Kaiser, and Pat is a retired wildlife biologist for the Wisconsin DNR. His duties as a wildlife biologist were varied, and he has many interesting stories to tell. But Pat, welcome to our podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be a part of your podcast.
Pat, one of the things that we have talked about is the varied types of duties that you had in your role with the Wisconsin DNR. And could you just give us an overview of the different types of things that you did when you worked for them?
Sure. I began working for the Wisconsin DNR in 1976, and it was a unique opportunity for me in that I grew up in the state of Missouri, and when I graduated from college, I started investigating opportunities to hopefully get a job in the field of wildlife ecology. And lo and behold, it just happened that Wisconsin had several field biologist positions open, and I was able to get into their program. The way Wisconsin works from the standpoint of wildlife management is they basically have a field biologist, or the same thing, wildlife manager title, so to speak, in virtually every other county. It kind of depends upon the number of state-owned wildlife areas, properties that there are within respective counties. So here in Wisconsin, I was assigned to a county called Columbia County, which is in the south central portion of Wisconsin. And most of our management activities were really, really varied overall. That's what was unique about the program. Varied from the standpoint that within the county, we had like 7 state-named wildlife areas, referred to as wildlife management areas. They ranged in size from roughly 250 acres, the smallest one, with the largest one being like 5,000 acres. And so the main responsibility was involved with doing management activities on those properties. Here in southern Wisconsin, the wildlife species that we had the opportunity to work with, the main ones were white-tailed deer, wild turkey, pheasant, waterfowl were the main ones. And so a lot of our management activities on the state wildlife areas, though, were more so pretty well confined to upland habitat management or grassland management, particularly pertaining to the waterfowl species that were most common. And that happened to be mallards, blue-winged teal were the 2 most common ones, and then wood ducks also. So on those properties, we had quite a bit of freedom in working about establishing habitat for those types of birds, which were basically ground nesting birds here in the southern part of the state. Other things that we got involved with was the aspect of some animal damage issues within the state. Here in Columbia County, we happen to have a really large white-tailed deer herd. And lo and behold, that was good in most respects. But if you talk to some of the farming community, they had issues with too many deer, basically from the aspect of doing damage to some of their agricultural crops. And most of it was revolving around alfalfa damage, cornfield damage, and soybeans to some extent also.
Was there a time of year, Pat, that damage was more prevalent than other times? I know in Nebraska, growing up, it seemed to be that in the winter time, some of those things became a big problem, especially when there was more snow.
Oh, okay. No, for us here, it was mainly during the growing season, during the summer, as well as toward the latter portion of when the crops were beginning to become more mature, virtually getting ready for harvest. Um, but the deer damage, obviously, in the hay fields was taking place in the months of May, June time period. And in some areas where the concentrations of deer were relatively high and where these fields were adjacent to habitat that the deer were really, really tuned into, alfalfa damage was fairly significant. And was Columbia County during the 70s and 80s and 90s having quite a bit of dairy farming operations taking place that, alfalfa hay was one of the premier crop types for those dairy farmers. And otherwise, for the grain crops, soybeans and corn were the two most common ones. But most of that damage was taking place during the growing season. So,
Was CWD a growing issue during your tenure with the Wisconsin DNR, or was it always prevalent? Or
no, chronic wasting disease basically, if I remember right, started showing up in about 2001 or 2002. And it may have been there a little bit prior to that time, but during roughly the last 10 years of my working with the DNR, from again, up through roughly 2012, 13 time period, the chronic wasting disease became much more prevalent. The disease continued to spread throughout the southern part of the state, and now even to the extent where it's in probably about 50 of the 72 counties within the state as a whole. So the deer herd in itself, the size of the deer herd in Wisconsin may have had some play in terms of why that outbreak took place. But essentially, the best that we could determine from some investigations that our law enforcement group did, the perspective and feeling is that most likely the disease came into the state as a result of private deer game farm operations, where these several or some private game farms basically bought deer from some of the western states. And there's the pretty good feeling that most likely that's how we ended up getting it started here in Wisconsin, because we found it here in Wisconsin before it showed up in Iowa, before it showed up in Minnesota. And I mean, essentially at the time that it showed up here in Wisconsin, it was known to be established in Colorado and Wyoming in particular. And so from one of the problems with trying to pinpoint exactly how it got here is that the deer game farm operation, even though they were required by state law to keep records of transfers of animals from their own game farm properties, or even purchasing of animals from other game farm properties in other states in the upper Midwest or wherever they may have gotten them from, their records in a lot of cases were pretty shabby, and there wasn't a lot of continuity to it. So actually determining where it came from, we don't have a concrete answer for that at all.
Sure. So in your tenure with the Wisconsin DNR, what do you think is your crown jewel? What are you the most proud of in terms of one of the projects that you worked on, or maybe a couple of different projects that you worked on?
Well, in probably to a large degree, the management that we did on grassland areas for establishing nesting cover for our ground nesting birds. And like I mentioned, all of the wildlife areas that we had in Columbia County, with the exception of one, they were basically established in wetland type communities, small wetlands or even small lake type properties. So the waterfowl, mallards, blue-winged teal, and wood duck were the two, main nesting species that we had. And so we ended up trying to put in what we thought was the most appropriate habitat type or cover type that those birds were known to be most using for their nesting activities overall. And part of the thing with the state wildlife areas that we had the opportunity to do was that when a wildlife area property was established in Wisconsin, they basically identified a project boundary. And that boundary, in most cases, since it was associated with wetlands, that boundary included the complete wetland basin area. But they also tried to include a fair amount of what was agricultural land around these properties, with the intent that if the state was able to acquire those lands, then we could convert those cropland fields into nesting cover. Because without nesting cover, the aspect of waterfowl production to take place is basically eliminated overall. So getting to that aspect of identifying the project boundaries, part of my job was also making contacts with landowners who had land within the project boundary. And basically, I was a land acquisition agent for the state of Wisconsin. And so I would make contacts with landowners, explain to them that if they ever had the interest of potentially selling some of their land, that the DNR would be interested in becoming another buyer in the marketplace. So occasionally, about every 3 or 4 years or so, we would send out just basically an inquisitive letter to those landowners who had land within the project boundary, explaining that we would be interested in potentially buying some of that if they had the interest in selling. And there would be no aspect of requiring that they, would have to potentially sell the land to us. Again, we wanted to just be another buyer in the marketplace. And if the appraised value for the property that they had, if that was within the ballpark of their interest, then we might be able to purchase some of that land. So that was always a very interesting and a fun thing to do, because you made friendships with landowners. They got to see basically who we were as an agency, and that, putting a person's face to a landowner property just kind of gave you a better perspective on being a part of, that farming community. So I would say that, the land acquisition part was really fun. Then being able to have the opportunity to do some management on those lands after they were purchased,
Sure,
was a lot of fun. Because basically into about the mid-80s time period, we started spending some time with doing grassland seedings using native prairie type species of plants and forbs, grasses that would have been prevalent here during the prehistoric, or not the prehistoric days, but in the early settlement days before, farming kind of broke up a lot of what had been natural prairie land areas here in the southern part of the state overall.
Right.
So we actively did, the preparation of the fields, doing the planning. And then we also, as some of those fields got established, one of the ways to improve the growth of the prairie plants is through a process of what we call prescribed burns. And so during springtime, usually late April up through about the middle of May, we had the opportunity in each year to do some grassland burning, and that was always a fun project to do too. I mean, it involved working with fire control people within our own agency, so we got to intermix and work with other functions within our department too, and so having those relationships built up and basically becoming more intertwined with other people within the agency was a good thing to do too.
Right. And those prescribed burns, those are for native prairie. Those are agents of
Yes.
rebirth, aren't they?
Yes, that is.
Everything that comes back. It comes back stronger and revitalized, and I just think that that's one of the things that, well, it has changed the outlook of agriculture first, plowing the land and planting crops and things like that.
Right.
Some of the native areas that are being either restored or preserved, that's a vital piece of that to remain strong.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
and you see it getting more and more popular too.
Oh,
right.
yes.
The native plantings, absolutely.
Yeah, you see that if reading outdoor magazines from different state agencies, particularly in the Midwest and even into, a lot of the Western states. I know North Dakota, South Dakota, they do a fair amount of that type of management. And with obviously fire, was a regular component of the natural native prairie before, white civilization came in and started converting those into agricultural fields. So maintaining
right.
the prairie mixture, natural fires, or even if they were set by Indian groups were part of the process too. So, yep, that was a very important part of managing.
Well, I think that one of the things that listening to you talk about your career and some of the projects that you were part of, I don't think I've met a Department of Natural Resource employee, whether it's a wildlife biologist, even a conservation officer, all of the different types of roles that are in the Department of Natural Resources. Mm-hmm. They always seem to share stories that I guess I would refer to as the same. It's never the same each day. You never got bored with your job. It was something new, something different projects, and it was always something that was kept it interesting. Never bored.
Yep. No, it never was. That was probably as good of a way of identifying as what you said there. We had so many different activities that we were responsible for, and a lot of it was being done by technicians that were part of our management program too. As a manager, you kind of organize those work activities and help them, do some of them. Part of the manager's job was probably a lot more administrative than what the technicians specifically had. Even with the management of the properties, what a lot of people don't probably think about very much is that there's a lot of maintenance work that is required on the properties. And, anytime that we would purchase a parcel of land and add it to the existing wildlife area that was there, then we had the need and the responsibility to do posting of the boundaries of the property so that the public users would have a good idea or better idea of knowing where the public land ends and where you would end up, getting adjacent to the adjacent private landowners. And along with that, there's always the aspect of having trails or roads that are needed to be maintained. Mm-hmm. And quite often some of the interior fences, for example, on these properties that were there as part of the previous farming operation, we basically had to take time to pull those fences out, just for example.
Sure.
And in a lot of the wetland aspect of it for the management, we had water control structures for manipulating water levels. And so that was always, there's always something taking place that you had to react to. And so the variety of the work was just phenomenal. It was just wonderful. When you got into the deer hunting season, part of our job too, in Wisconsin, they had the requirement of registration of deer. Every hunter that harvested a deer, whether it was bow hunting season or the gun hunting season, they had to take that deer to some location. Sometimes they were gas stations, sometimes they were hardware stores, but where they allowed us to set up basically a site for hunters to bring in their deer to have it registered.
Sure.
And so that was a continual thing during the months of September, October, November overall. And another part that we did that was really interesting too is during the gun deer season, part of our responsibility as deer herd management within Wisconsin, the state was broken down into about 80, 85 basically geographical habitat areas, which we call deer management units. And for each of those deer management units, what we tried to do on at least a bi-yearly basis was age a small sample of the population, basically of the deer that were harvested by hunters, and to get a perspective on what the age range was of the deer within the population. What percentage were fawns, what percentage were year and a half old deer, what percentage was 2.5, 3.5, and that type of a thing. Because Wisconsin had developed a model for determining deer populations through basically a mathematical formula that over a period of about 10, 15 years, they were able to come up with a pretty doggone precise estimate of deer populations. But one of the criteria that was really important was to know what percentage of the deer were in the year and a half old age category and what percentage of them were fawns. So that was always a fun time. We had a lot of interaction with hunters that were happy hunters. They were successful hunters.
Sure.
And so when you have that opportunity, that gives you a better feeling too of how important of the work that we were doing, was important for the hunters to understand that we're trying to do things that were good for the deer population. I mean, just as an example. So the variety was, again, so much and so varied. It just was really enjoyable. I can't say there was very few days over the course of the 30 years that I worked that I didn't enjoy it overall.
Sure. That's the hope for everybody, to be able to say when they reach retirement that they enjoyed every day that they did work.
Yeah, so, that's true. No doubt about that.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned this in our introduction, that you are a friend of the Spader family, and yes. I've been honored and privileged to know Stephanie and her children for about 3.5 years now. And
Greg's sucking up a little bit.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, Pat, and your wife Carol, we'll talk to her here in a little bit, and she's listening in right now, but I will be honest that some of the first stories that I heard that Stephanie and her children shared were Pat and Carol Kaiser stories. So the one of the reasons why we wanted you to be on the podcast was to talk about this friendship. You met Catherine's father, Tony. If I am correct on this, it was in the Black Hills, and Stephanie's shaking her head no. But so anyway, I'll just ask that question. How did you meet Tony, and And I think out of that, you might have gotten a pheasant hunt or two out of it.
You're very close, Greg.
Okay.
You did a pretty good summary, but Stephanie was correct too.
Darn.
Darn. Anyway, it was really interesting in that my best friend here in Wisconsin, his name was Carl Batha, and his wife, Jeannie. I had known them from the first day that I came to Wisconsin. In fact, I inadvertently got to know Carl Batha when I was just finishing up my graduate research degree at the University of Missouri in Columbia. And I had basically finished up my work. And lo and behold, I was in the wildlife ecology office one day, and this guy from Wisconsin called down to the Missouri Cooperative Wildlife Research Unit and said, "Hey, are there any are there any graduate students from Missouri that are in the process of graduating and they're looking for a job?" And I happened to be a lucky person. I was in the office that day, and the secretary told me about it, and I said, "Well, sure." I said, "I don't care where I go to work. You know, when you get your degree, you're willing to almost go any place just to get your feet on the ground and to get started." So I called this person up in Wisconsin, and lo and behold, it was Carl. So anyway, that's essentially how I ended up getting into Wisconsin. Carl had gotten his master's degree at the University of Missouri in Columbia, like about 3 years before I completed my degree. And he had gotten a job with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. So he was basically looking out and trying to get other potential candidates to apply to Wisconsin for positions that were open for wildlife management. So lo and behold, I ended up getting to Wisconsin. So anyway, as a result of that initial contact with Carl, I got to know Carl's and Jeannie, their family. And so we made constant and really immediate friendship. But anyway, Carl and Jeannie were out in the Black Hills of South Dakota one summer. They were vacationing out there, and lo and behold, the campground that they were at, the campground host was Tony. And you got to know Carl to get an understanding of how he interacts with people. He's just a great people person. He'll talk to anybody, and he's got such an interest in the outdoors, in hunting and fishing. I could almost picture it from the day that he talked about it, that making a contact with Tony was so easy, because that's what Tony was about at that time too. He just loved the outdoors. And so anyway, over several days of Carl and Jeannie being at that campground, obviously Carl and Tony got to talking about pheasant hunting apparently. So over the period of those several days, Tony apparently invited Carl to come out, said, "Hey, you better come out to South Dakota. I'll show you what pheasant hunting is about." So Carl said, I said, "I'm going to take you up on that." So anyway, Carl, and Jeannie got back to Wisconsin from their vacation, and a short time period after that, Carl was telling me about his contact that he had with Tony. And I think that was in 1992. And so Carl, asked me, he said, "Hey, Pat," said, "you want to go along pheasant hunting out in South Dakota with me this fall?" And I could hardly wait, because I didn't give him more than 2 seconds. And I said, "Well, absolutely." So that's how we ended up getting to meet Tony, or I did anyway, because that fall, I think it was in October, might have been early November, Carl and I went out there, and we met Tony, and so anyway, we spent about 4 or 5 days, pheasant hunting there in South Dakota in that fall of 1992. So that's how I was able to obtain that first opportunity of meeting Tony. And at that time, I don't think Stephanie was part of Tony's life at all.
Okay.
So over a period of years, we came back to South Dakota a couple of different times and hunted with Tony and some of his friends. I remember one of his good friends was Doug Neese, and so we got to know Doug and some of the other friends of Tony's there in that south or southeastern part of South Dakota. And so that's kind of how our friendship, got off the ground, and that's where we got started.
Well, I want to introduce your wife, Carol. Hello, Carol.
Hi.
We joked earlier about how I should introduce you as Pat's better half or something along those lines, but I'll leave it at that. I won't go any further with that. But welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So I would just like to interject with a little bit of a story here, because I remember, I'm sure I had met you guys when I was like very young, but the first time I remember meeting you guys was when Mom and Dad dropped AJ and I off with you guys before we were going to camp in Wisconsin. So we spent like a week with you guys, and then you guys took us to camp in Wisconsin, and then Mom picked us up. But we had... Yeah, we had just gotten to your guys' house, and Carol and I decided we were going to go on a walk. Because is it a mile in your backyard that you can walk?
Oh, yeah.
Pretty close.
Pretty close.
I don't even know.
About 3/4 of a mile. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I don't even know. I don't think Greg knows this story. And we get about halfway through, Carol, and do you remember I got like the worst bloody nose?
Yes.
So and I've got like blood all over my face, like down my shirt, like I'm trying to plug it, and we're like, well, we can't really turn around because we're already like halfway there, so we might as well just keep walking. And I remember getting back and AJ being like, oh my gosh, like did this crazy lady like try to attack you? Like we barely know these people. And I was like, no, I just got a bloody nose. But I tell people that story all the time because I think it's so funny.
Yes, but we got the blood stopped.
We got the blood stopped, and we got it out of whatever I was wearing.
It all turned out well.
Yeah.
Well, I'm also going to introduce my wife, Catherine's mother, Stephanie.
Hello.
Welcome, Stephanie.
You didn't unmute her.
Yeah, I did.
Oh, I didn't hear her.
I did.
Couldn't hear.
You need to talk louder, Steph.
I've never been told that before. Well, it's an honor to be here. I'm grateful.
Well, this is about friendships, and this has been a friendship that started when Pat was introduced to Tony, and then the friendship continued to grow as time went on.
I was going to make a comment about Catherine's story here. I don't remember the bloody nose aspect at all, but what I do remember is AJ and Catherine both came here to go to Camp Gray, which is a Catholic youth camp near Wisconsin Dells. And I think maybe, was that the first time you were here, Catherine, when related to the same Camp Gray youth camp that you do?
Yeah.
That's what I thought. Okay.
Yep. We came out. Well, the first year we came out, we spent a week with you guys and then went to camp. And then the second time we came out, we went to camp, then spent a week with you guys. And then Mom and Dad brought all of the other siblings up, and we went out to Sheboygan and went fishing for a couple days.
Was it salmon fishing?
I think so. I don't remember.
Well, it's, whatever that fish is that we have hanging on the wall is what we went fishing for.
Salmon.
I would think that was a Chinook salmon.
I think you're right. I get my salmon and my trout mixed up a lot. I just don't see them or fish for them enough.
Right. I know what you mean.
That it's the same as we were talking about, like a grouse versus a hen pheasant. I don't know if I would be able to tell the difference.
Oh, yes,
Well,
you would.
yes, you would.
You think I would? Okay, that makes me feel better.
Okay.
They have totally different tails, don't they?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Different habitats, too.
Mm.
Right.
rough grouse or woodland type birds, whereas pheasants obviously open grassland field birds.
Well, the reason we wanted Pat and Carol on our podcast was to talk about friends and talk about how people become an influence in other people's lives without even trying. And I would say one more word to that, a positive influence in other people's lives without even trying. As I said, I've heard Pat and Carol stories, and I know that each and every one of them include some type of camaraderie, some type of time spent together outdoors often. And not just the pheasant hunting that started the friendship, but what I'm going to ask Stephanie, I guess, is Stephanie, what would you like to share about the story that of the Spader family with Pat and Carol?
Well, I honestly don't even know the first time I met them. I just know that we had quite a few different hunts where Carl and Jeannie and Pat and Carol would come to South Dakota. And I remember one time we brought a camper home to our house and parked it like half on our lawn, half on our street. And they stayed in that. And we went hunting during the day, came home and had dinner with the family at night. I specifically remember the young kids. I have 4 girls and 1 boy, and the girls painted Carl's toenails for sure. I guess I don't remember.
I don't remember this.
If Pat's toenails got painted, but I remember the story because Carl went home and went to a doctor's appointment not long after that and forgot his toes were painted and had to explain to the doctor what was going on. So, but we just always enjoyed their company so much. And over the years, my kids would refer to them as the third set of grandparents.
That is an honor.
It was always such a joy to have them come out. And I remember a story about Carol. She knows what I'm going to say. In South Dakota, there's pheasants kind of everywhere. And you're not necessarily used to that when you're coming from Wisconsin. They are used to hunting behind a dog, and they go in a field by themselves or just with a couple people, and the dog points a pheasant here or there. And it's a little bit different in South Dakota. And I remember we were going from one field to the other, and we turned a corner, and there was a bunch of pheasants in a corner just eating, feeding, whatever. And Carol, who's just very meek and mild and well-mannered, she screamed, "Holy shit," really loud. And we all kind of looked at her and we were like, what's going on? She had never seen that many pheasants before in one place. So that was fun. But yeah, we have lots and lots of memories and a lot of life that we did together over the years.
Yeah, we sure did.
Agreed.
Yeah, we were out there quite a few different times, like in 2001, 2002, and I kind of went through some photos and pictures that we had today, kind of remind myself. And boy, we came out there and you guys hosted us so many different times. It was like wonderful vacation every time we came out.
Yes.
And it went the other direction too, because they always invited us to come to Wisconsin with our family, and we would go out there and they have, I guess, correct me, 20, 40 acres, something like that.
We got 35 acres.
Well, see, I was close. I was right
Did you say
around
20
it.
to 40?
Yeah.
That's a pretty big,
A wide range,
Yeah.
but she got it.
say you would have to guess pretty far off if you weren't in between that. Anywhere from 10 to 100 acres.
Hey, I was a little bit better than that. But anyway, they have a beautiful home on this property. And back in the day when we first started going, there was no Wi-Fi. So we would get there and we would be completely unplugged. And our kids would have to learn, how to entertain themselves just in the forest behind their house. And
They got
you guys loved it though, right?
4 channels on the TV, I think. And I remember AJ and I watching like Saved by the Bell or something. And we were like, we have no idea where this is from. Like, this is way before our time. And that was like the one TV show that you guys got. Otherwise, we just kept watching the same movie over and over and over.
It,
We're
kids,
pretty proud of that. We still only get the farmer channels.
well,
You know what the farmer are, don't you?
say that again, Pat.
The weather in the news.
Close.
No, we always call it the farmer FARMER channels, meaning that since we didn't have dish, we didn't have satellite, we just got a extended antenna up on top of our house, so we still only get like 4 channels overall. So we don't have exposure to the outside world very much.
There's nothing wrong with that.
But you don't have dial-up internet anymore, so you do have a little more option.
Yeah, we got a little bit more options, Steph.
We
Yeah,
advanced a little there.
it's still pretty slow. I think it's like hertz of power.
Pat and Carol's house was also the first time I learned about area codes, because I remember trying to call mom and I kept dialing her phone number. This is before you like had to put the area code in.
Okay.
Like they changed that like 2 years ago. I don't know.
Well-
And I kept dialing it. It was this guy that answered. And I was like, I keep dialing the wrong phone number. And then I was like, oh, maybe I have to do this 605. Maybe that's important when I'm not in the same state. And I learned about area codes.
That's part of being educated, right?
Yeah.
We're
st-
always on a learning curve, Greg.
As Catherine and I have shared on our podcast, our family stories, our listeners have heard that Catherine is one of 5 children of Tony and Stephanie. Her little sister, Rebecca, passed away from leukemia. Some of the stories that I have heard about Pat and Carol have been during the times before and after Rebecca's death. So, Stephanie, what can you share about your memories and your thoughts about Pat and Carol during those times?
Well, these 2 people are just gems. They are those kind of friends that you don't just find all the time. And when life started happening for us, our first child actually had a lot of medical issues as well, Mesa, who you guys have heard talk on the podcast before as well. Both her and Rebecca had quite a few hospitalizations, and when they got really sick, they went to Minneapolis. I remember probably the first time that Pat and Carol pitched in, they actually took our dog during a time that we had a long hospitalization. Her name was Bailey. She was a Chesapeake Bay Retriever. Pat and Carol had a couple dogs at that time too, so they really had their hands full. That's the kind of people they are. They're just going to step up and help when help is needed. And we were in Minneapolis a different time, I think. I guess I don't know if it was the same hospitalization during Easter. And they drove from the Madison, Wisconsin area to Minneapolis to bring us Easter brunch, if I remember that correctly. They didn't stay overnight. They just literally made a day of it so that we could have a home-cooked meal during a time that was difficult and we were away from our family and stuff. So, but it was like that the entire time that we struggled with different hospitalizations and illnesses, sicknesses with the girls. Even though they live 7 hours away, they were always there to help.
True friends.
Absolutely.
Well, Pat and Carol, do you have any stories that you would like to share, especially with Stephanie? Because I need some dirt. I'm kidding.
No, I don't have any.
Oh.
There won't be any dirt, that's for sure.
No.
He was an angel and a gem.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, and that's I'm sorry I kind of went a different direction there, but those are the types of stories though that I've heard, Pat and Carol, and those true friends, and those are the kinds of things that people remember for the rest of their lives, and so thank you for
That's
those.
what makes strong friendships. It was wonderful on our end to have that opportunity to try and help out. And I mean, I can remember a couple of times when they came through our part of Wisconsin here, and I know they had a medical appointment. I think one was with, for example, with Teresa. She was having some issues pertaining to glasses, and it was always fun to have them stop by and make their journey a little bit shorter by having a place to stay. And even remember when Rebecca and Tony and Stephanie came through, they had a medical appointment in Milwaukee, if I remember,
That's right.
at a hospital there.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was always good to be able to try and be part of that journey with them. Being so far away, it was, kind of difficult to be there on a regular basis, but we certainly enjoyed any and all of the opportunities to spend time with them. We spent a lot more time out at their place because it was so convenient for Carol and I to do that. They were always so welcoming to have us out there. We got numerous pictures of some of the pheasant hunting that we did, some of the times there in their home. I can remember once it was around Christmas time, and Teresa wasn't born yet at that time, so I don't remember what year that would have been. But we got just a neat picture of the four children sitting on the steps going upstairs.
Yeah.
Of them, and it just always kind of brings a tear to my eye when I see that and remember that. So it was really, really neat.
Mm-hmm. That was the year we put the upside down tree up.
Absolutely. I loved my upside down tree, and nobody else did.
I liked it. I was so mad when you got rid of it. You were like, nobody likes it. I was like, I like it. That's what I grew up with. That's what a tree's supposed to look like.
Well, it was just really handy when you had 5 little kids and dogs and things like that, because the limbs didn't start until about 3 feet up, and they were small limbs, and then they got bigger as they went up. And the kids couldn't touch and play with the ornaments, and it didn't take up much room in the house. And it was really absolutely wonderful.
It was pretty ugly though. It was, but like looking back on it, I'm like, yeah, that thing's kind of ugly, but like that's what I grew up with.
Sure.
That's true.
Yeah.
And it looks like a real tree.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So, Catherine, what do you remember about Pat and Carol growing up and our experiences together?
Yeah, I guess, like I said, that first time I really remember meeting you guys was when we went to Camp Gray for the first time. So I was probably in 3rd grade.
Didn't you actually call the time that you spent with them Camp Kaiser before Camp Gray?
We called it Camp Kaiser.
Yep, it was.
Yep. And that's what it was too, because like we would wake up and then we would go fishing, and then we would like do something fun that night, and then the next day we would go hiking, and then the next day they'd take us on the ferry. Like we were always doing something. It was basically camp. I do remember Carol took me shopping, and I'm not a big shopper, and I remember her being like, we're going shopping. I was like, okay. She like bought me all this stuff for my hair. She bought me a case for my camera, because I brought that was like when I started taking pictures, and I had just like a little baby digital camera, and we had fun. And I don't know what AJ and Pat did. It was not as fun as what we did though, so didn't really matter.
Well, of course we went fishing.
Probably went fishing.
So, Catherine, do you remember spending Easter with them?
I do remember that. I also remember we accidentally put a Easter egg down one of your trees, and I don't think it ever actually came out. So if that tree ever falls down, you'll have to let me know if it's still there.
Like in a squirrel hole or what?
Yeah, I think we tried to hide it in a hole in the tree, and it ended up just falling in, if I remember correctly. But that was we spent Easter with you guys, and I think it was some of your friends.
Yes.
Yes.
But it was really nice. I remember it being like 80 degrees.
It was a warm April that year. Yeah.
Mhm.
It was beautiful. Yes.
Well, I'm sure that egg will still be there, because if I remember right, that was a plastic egg.
Yes. Yes, it was. And I think it had jelly beans in it, but I'm sure the jelly beans have disintegrated by now.
The squirrels probably ate the jelly beans.
I think that's the last time I was.
That's so sad.
I know.
Yeah, I think so too, Catherine. I think it has. Yes.
Because you guys came here a couple of years ago.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that because I slept on the couch and you guys. You don't remember that, Mom?
I do.
Oh.
That's right.
Yeah, middle of the summer is July, and I remember AJ organized a pigeon hunt.
Yeah. Yeah, we did go pigeon hunting.
Okay, I didn't do that. I don't remember that.
I think that was in 2000 and roughly 18 or 19.
No, well, that would have been at
Mm-mm.
yeah, we did do that. That was at the old house though. You guys have been here at our new house, haven't you?
Oh, yes, we have.
Yes,
Sure.
we have.
Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
I was gonna say because that would have been like 2021 or 20. I think it's 2021.
Might have been 21. I think you're right, Catherine. Yep.
I know that you've told Stephanie and the kids that they're welcome any time out to your place in Wisconsin, and I sure hope that that's something that happens here soon, because I haven't had the opportunity to meet you in person. Just got to we did a Google phone call one time, and we've talked over the phone, but
Yes.
I am looking forward to seeing this Camp Kaiser, as it's been named.
Well, I specifically remember telling Pat and Carol when I was single that I wanted to find a man like Pat.
Yeah.
And it's going to make me cry. And I cannot wait to get these two men in the same place, because I think they are two peas in a pod and have a lot of similarities. And
We
I would
do
say,
joke a lot that they both really like biology and they both like to talk very slow.
Yes,
That's
Pat,
the running joke.
I get so much crap about how deliberate I am when I talk sometimes. So I try to speed it up.
but both very strong Christian men with big hearts, love for children, a love for the outdoors, all the good qualities. So
It's kind of you to say.
Well, thank you, Stephanie.
All right, get a room.
Well, Pat, I wanted to ask you this and put Catherine, kind of throw her under the bus, but
Oh,
maybe I'll be
no.
surprised. But you know a gentleman by the name of Patrick Durkin, and he's also from Wisconsin. And
Yes.
one of the things that you have in common with Patrick was a reading of the Sand County Almanac by Aldo Leopold. And
Yes.
I bought a copy specifically for Catherine to read. And
I've been reading it.
you have?
Yeah, I've even been making notes. I think I'm like almost halfway through. I've been reading it very slowly, but I have been reading it.
Okay. So what do you think about this? Is the 75th anniversary, I do believe, of the publishing of the Sand County Almanac, and Aldo Leopold is known, I guess, as the father of ecology or environmental science, or at least taking a look at things that way. Is that a good read for Catherine to be reading to try to brush up on her knowledge of conservation?
Yes, it is. I think Aldo Leopold was, like you were indicating, he was basically identified as the father of wildlife management, so to speak, in its current perspective of how to manipulate and how to basically manage wild game populations. He wrote that, like you said, roughly 75 years ago. And what's so unique about it is that he has such an easy and kind of a poetic way of talking about the different aspects of the natural world, particularly of the wildlife species world overall. And I think that's what resonates with so many people, is that he had such a different perspective and such a different vision of how wild animal populations can be managed, but also because he was in its infancy, so to speak, of understanding what makes wildlife populations tick, so to speak, is that he could explain it in a really simple, understanding type terms overall. For many of the wildlife ecology programs at universities around the United States, that's probably a number one reading requirement that they have is at some time during their first year or two, they are asked to read the Sand County Almanac. And there's a place up here in Wisconsin. It's only about probably 25 miles from where we live, and it's called the Aldo Leopold Shack. And essentially, what it was, it's a place that Aldo Leopold purchased back in I think it was in the 1940s during the Depression. No, it was after the Depression, but it was part of the latter end of the Dust Bowl time period. It was basically an old chicken coop. Aldo Leopold, wanted to have a place to go to and work on some of his ideas of land management. So he bought this acreage, and offhand, I don't remember, Catherine, how many acres. It was something like, maybe 40 or 50 acres in size overall.
10 to 100.
Oh, jeez.
Close in that
In that range. Throwing Stephanie under the bus now.
So anyway, he basically took a burnt out farm operation that was in the floodplain of the Wisconsin River, and over the number of years, he basically recreated habitat on that old farm that was basically a very sandy soil type area, and he started doing things that reestablish habitat on it. So anyway, this journal that he has, the Sand County Almanac, it's really a fun read. And I mean, I know people that have probably read that thing 25 or 30 different times. They're just so enthralled by it overall. So yeah, I would say it's a very good read, and it's easy to remember things just by the way he had his process of putting words down into a language that was easy to understand, I guess you might say.
Right. Very eloquent
Yes,
in terms of his word choice. And I misspoke. I said the father of ecology and environmental science, but that's not correct. What you said is correct with regard to land management and the land management practices and conservation and recognizing that. The thing that you talked about, somebody who's, people that have read it 25, 30 times, I used to teach it. I bought a class set for my environmental science classes that I taught for about 12 years. And one of those heartwarming moments that I had was about, maybe it was about 10 years after a particular student graduated from high school. And she contacted my daughter and said, you need to tell your dad that I just experienced the spring or the thaw. One of the essays that he wrote talks about how the January thaw takes place and when the cardinal starts to sing its spring song, So that was one of those times that, in my 18 years of teaching biology and environmental science and those things, I had one student that, listened.
Sure, right.
No, I've really enjoyed it so far. Like I said, I haven't read it super fast, but I did take it with me to Yellowstone. I was going to say Colorado. Technically, I did go to Colorado on the plane, but Yellowstone. And so I read it a little bit on the plane as well. But it's very poetic. That was like a very good word for it, but it's just easy to read. And he's got a lot of really good information in there. I didn't know that Wisconsin used to have elk.
Yes.
That's one of the things I learned.
Oh, okay.
Had no idea.
I think they were, just for example, on that aspect, was kind of interesting about elk in Wisconsin is during my time of working with the Department of Natural Resources, this is just kind of like a little side note, anyway, um, we have several trout streams here in Columbia County, and associated with the office that we had in Poinet for the Department of Natural Resources for our wildlife management and fish management program. The fisheries biologist was taking a group of kids out on a field trip one day on one of the trout streams where they were doing some trout shocking, just to show the young students what trout habitat looked like and what trout looked like. So with one of these backpack type electrical shockers, you're able to basically stun the fish and they come floating up to the top of the water. But anyway, one of the days when they were doing one of those exercises, one of the students was in the stream with them, and anyway, he stepped on something, and the water was fairly clear because with it being spring fed, and he stuck his hand down in the water into the bottom of the stream, and he started pulling on it, and he thought he had a limb that had gotten partially buried, in the stream bed. So as the water kind of cleared away, they started getting a little bit of a closer look at it, and they realized that, heck, it looks like it's the tip of an antler of something. So over a short period of time, they were able to dig that out, and it ended up being an elk antler that had been deposited there, apparently, up to about 300 years ago.
Really?
That's
my
crazy. I would
goodness.
say because it was like 1800s, wasn't it, when it when
I would
the
say-
last one was killed or whatever.
I'm thinking it would have been, Catherine, in the early 1800s, maybe
Mhm.
late 1700s. Yes.
See, I think that's what it said in his book, was that it was
Yep.
like early 1800s.
Okay, probably was. So
I think.
anyway, they were able to pull that antler out, and they showed it to me, and I said, we should take that thing down to the University of Wisconsin in Madison, and go to the zoology department. They had a means of doing radiocarbon dating on the antler, and anyway, that particular animal, if I remember right, they estimated had died about roughly 200 to 250 years ago. So
Wow.
elk were apparently quite common in the southern half of the state of Wisconsin, because about half of the southern half was basically natural prairie type habitat overall. The forested region, at that time anyway, was more prevalent in the northern half of the state.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
But since that, they have introduced elk into Wisconsin about 15 to 20 years ago. Now we have a small elk herd, but we don't have a hunting season. Wait, I'll take it back. They did have a limited hunting season about 2 years ago. I think there was like 5 tags that were made available. So slowly but surely, we're trying to
Reestablish
rebuild the population. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Well, Pat and Carol, thank you for taking the time to visit with us. It's been an honor for me, and I know that this is something that was important to Catherine and Stephanie both, and the entire Spader family. The time that they've been able to spend with you is something that has been cherished. And one of the things that my parents taught me, I think applies to this conversation that we've had tonight, is, to be called a friend is pretty special. So it's to be a friend and to be called a friend is one of those things in life that people can strive for. And I think that the friendship that you have with Catherine and her family and Stephanie is special. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today, and I hope I get to meet you. They've met you. I hope I get to meet you soon. And right now I'm going to tell you that there's a distraction going on because Catherine just saw a toad start to jump across the patio.
Oh, must be raining outside.
It is. It is. It's still wet, but
Well, your words are very well taken, and basically exactly the same feeling on our end to you and the Spader family. Uh, it's been what a great journey and a very enjoyable time, and what a wonderful friendship we have, and we certainly are intending to continue that on in the future too.
and we've talked about this in previous podcasts. Our lives are really divided into chapters, and we're all in our next chapter. Thank you.
You got that right. Thank you too.
Thanks, Pat and Carol. And I just think of how often Catherine and Greg talk on this podcast about enjoying the outdoors. And Greg, I have heard say several times that whether you hunt or you want to bird watch or you want to go just be in nature, that just to enjoy it no matter how it comes. And I just think about this friendship wouldn't have started without the love of hunting, of Carl and you, Pat, and then also with Tony. But that's just the very tip in the beginning of what has happened with this relationship and the story of our lives. So I'm grateful for our the common denominator of hunting and fishing and enjoying the outdoors. But it ends up being so much more than that.
Yes, it has. You're very correct on that.
I really enjoyed talking to you guys again. It's been forever. So someone's got to make a trip somewhere so we can all see each other again.
Oh, yes.
We will be there in August.
Oh, that's right.
I didn't know this.
Yeah.
Are you guys are coming for the wedding?
Oh,
yes.
absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Good. I didn't know that.
Well, again, thank you guys. And we will be talking again. And I appreciate you taking the time to visit with us tonight. And until next time.
All right.
Yes, all right. Sounds great.
Okay.
We enjoyed it very much.
Bye, guys.
All right.
You bet.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
If you or someone you know is thinking of suicide or in need of crisis intervention, call the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. To all our listeners, take some time and get outside, enjoy the outdoors, and experience its healing powers. With that, on behalf of Catherine and me, and Stephanie this time too, until next time.